Hey guys, tonight we drift into the mist, into waters older than memory, where the moon paints silver paths across a quiet labyrinth of canals. You can almost taste the damp air, thick with the scent of lake weeds and old earth. Beneath your small wooden boat, the water moves like a living thing, slow, secretive, maybe even suspicious of your presence. Somewhere in the darkness, a heron shrieks, and the sound slices through the night before folding back into silence. You probably won't survive this, not because of monsters or curses, though honestly we might bump into both, but because the calm itself feels like it could swallow you whole. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this weird little journey travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The paddle dips again, slicing through the water. You lean forward as your boat glides deeper into what was once the heart of the Aztec Empire's agricultural wonder, the floating gardens of Xochimilcan. Mist curls low over the surface, catching fragments of light from distant houses. Somewhere a dog barks, somewhere else a marimba tune fades into nothing. You could almost believe the city beyond these canals doesn't exist. Your guide, an old man with a hat wide enough to shade a canoe, barely speaks. He only nods toward the horizon, where rows of dark shapes rise from the water, chinampas, the ancient floating gardens. They're not actually floating, of course. You'll learn that soon enough. For now, they just look like islands of shadow, stitched together by roots and time. The air hums differently here. Maybe it's the crickets, or maybe it's the past pressing close. You imagine the year is 1485, and instead of neon city lights, the skyline glows with temple fires and starlight. Around you, thousands of small boats drift between lush green corridors, people laughing, trading maize and flowers, priests chanting blessings over harvests that never seem to fail. This was the Aztec secret, the green heartbeat that kept Tenochtitlan alive. Historians still argue whether these chinampas were a stroke of necessity or genius, born from desperation in a swamp, or divine insight from gods who liked their agriculture neat and geometric. Either way, they worked. 1 acre could feed more people than any European field of the same size. Imagine rows of maize reaching toward the sun, marigolds nodding in gold clusters, amaranth shimmering red like spilled wine. The paddle creaks. You drift closer. Careful, the guide mutters. The water remembers. You laugh quietly, thinking he's joking, but then he adds, "They say the lake still swallows what it wants. Tools, boats, sometimes people. A beat. Mostly tourists." He grins, a flash of teeth in the dark. First joke of the night, solid 6 out of 10 on the unease scale. Your fingers trail in the water. It's cool, silty, thick with life. The Aztecs called this place the Venice of the New World, though honestly, Venice could never. These canals weren't luxury, they were survival. The entire valley of Mexico was once a shallow lake system, Texcoco, Xochimilcan, Chalco, connected like veins. The Mexica people, later known as the Aztecs, didn't drain them, they shaped them. They learned to make land float on water. You pass the first island, low and rectangular. Trees rise like guardians at each corner, the ahuehuete, a kind of willow that drinks greedily from the lake and anchors the soil. The Aztecs planted them deliberately, knowing their roots would bind the chinampa's edges, holding it steady through rain and time. Beneath the surface, layers of reeds and mud compacted into something firm enough to farm, yet flexible enough to breathe with the tide. You imagine workers centuries ago, waist-deep in mud, stacking vegetation like lasagna. Reeds, silt, grass, more reeds. No tractors, no machinery, just rhythm, teamwork, and an absurd level of optimism. Somewhere between exhaustion and devotion, they turned a lake into farmland. The guide's lantern sways, shadows twist on the water. He hums a tune that sounds like both lullaby and warning. You ask him if people still build new chinampas. He shrugs. Some, for tourists mostly. Real ones take patience, and patience doesn't sell well. There's that gentle sarcasm again, proof you've met a kindred spirit. You look up. The stars scatter across the night, but a faint glow from Mexico City stains the horizon, like a memory that refuses to fade. You try to imagine what this place looked like before concrete and traffic. No honking, no streetlights, just canoes slipping through liquid mirrors, every paddle a quiet prayer. A splash breaks your trance. Something moves beneath the surface, bigger than a fish, slower than comfort. You freeze, half amused, half unsettled. Just a carp, the guide says. Pause. Or a spirit. Another grin. You're beginning to suspect he rehearses these lines. The Aztecs believed water was sacred, a bridge between worlds. Offerings were tossed into it. Flowers, food, sometimes even human hearts. To them, the lake wasn't something to conquer, but to converse with. Every harvest, every flood, every reflection was a message from the gods. One mainstream historical fact? Ready? The Chinampa system could produce up to 7 harvests a year. 7! That's industrial-level productivity long before the word industrial meant anything. Spanish conquistadors arriving in the 1500s couldn't believe it. They thought the fields were floating by magic. Honestly, same. A quirky tidbit? The Aztecs used to plant chili peppers not just for flavor, but to keep pests away. Basically, the world's first organic insect repellent. You imagine someone sneezing mid-ritual and blaming it on divine punishment instead of capsaicin. As your boat drifts onward, the mist thickens, swallowing the edges of everything. You can't tell where the water ends and the sky begins. The lantern light seems to fade faster than it should. Somewhere, frogs croak in sync, almost like a chant. You feel a strange pull, as if the canals themselves want to tell their story. You lean back, close your eyes, and let the gentle rocking lull you. The sounds blur, the paddle, the frogs, the hush of history breathing through reeds. The guide murmurs something you barely catch. Everything that grows here grows from memory. And that's how it begins. The water whispers again, and in that whisper, you hear the echo of centuries, the hum of builders, farmers, and dreamers who once turned this fragile wetland into the beating green heart of an empire. The air smells of damp soil and something sweet, maybe flowers left as offerings long ago. You exhale, and the boat keeps moving. The boat glides deeper, the mist thinning just enough to reveal long shadows of islands stitched together by reed fences. You can almost see the fingerprints of the past pressed into the mud. These chinampas, floating gardens, are more than clever farming plots. They're whispers of survival. Every layer of soil, every tangle of roots, carries the memory of hands that refused to surrender to the swamp. You kneel at the edge of the boat, dipping your hand again. The water feels heavier now, sluggish with secrets. Your guide, still silent as an owl, taps the wooden edge with his paddle. "You feel it?" he asks. You nod, though you're not entirely sure what it is. Maybe the weight of the past. Maybe a fish. Maybe both. "Good," he says, "because this place listens before it speaks." The canals around you open like veins, leading toward the ghostly skeleton of an island. The air grows warmer, the reeds hiss softly in the wind. Here, the remnants of old chinampas peek above the surface, collapsed, half swallowed by time. You imagine what this space once was, alive with color and noise, a checkerboard of life woven through water. The Aztecs, or Mexica, arrived in the Valley of Mexico around the 13th century, nomads chasing a prophecy. You remember that one. They were to settle where they found an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a snake. And when they found that vision rising from the swampy heart of Lake Texcoco, they didn't hesitate. They built Tenochtitlan, an island city that seemed impossible. Historians still argue whether the first Chinampas were an Aztec innovation or inherited from earlier cultures like the Xochimilcam. Whoever started them, the Aztecs perfected the art. Picture this. The waterlogged valley offered little solid land, so instead of draining the lakes, the Aztecs built on top of them. Using reeds, mud, and sheer stubbornness, they extended their city outward, one floating plot at a time. Necessity, the guide says, breaking your thoughts. That's how all magic starts. You look out at the ghostly grid of what once was. The Chinampas were built in neat rectangles, separated by canals just wide enough for a canoe. Each island was like a floating farm bed, 30 feet wide, maybe 300 long. The builders would stake out the perimeter with reeds and willow branches, fill the space with layers of vegetation, then pile on mud dredged from the lakebed. Over time, the muck settled, compacting into a fertile, floating patch of land. And here's the kicker. Because the roots extended into nutrient-rich water, the crops never ran dry. The Aztecs didn't need rain or drought insurance, just balance. Nature's hydroponic system, centuries before the word hydroponic had a marketing budget. You spot something shining in the mud along one island's edge. The guide paddles closer. It's a small obsidian shard, slick with water. You hold it up, watching the light scatter across its surface. Knife, or mirror, or both. The Aztecs saw no difference. You grin, because honestly, that's a great metaphor for life, something beautiful and sharp at the same time. The guide chuckles softly. They believed obsidian could cut through lies, but it also cut through a lot of fingers. Second joke of the night, grim, but we'll allow it. As you drift farther, the landscape grows stranger. The Chinampas form a patchwork of green and shadow. Some are overgrown, tangled with vines and lilies. Others look freshly tended, rows of maize reaching toward the dawn. You can smell earth and flowers, hear the murmur of frogs like a choir in the dark. The Aztecs had a saying, Tatlictanelia, the earth, the water, the fire. Life was always about balance. Every Chinampa reflected that belief, a dance between land and lake, man and God. Farmers would rise before dawn, whisper prayers to Tlaloc, the rain god, and sprinkle lake water on the soil as an offering. Here's your historical fact. At its peak, the Chinampa system stretched for thousands of acres, supporting nearly 250,000 people in Tenochtitlan and around it. The Spanish conquistadors arriving in 1519 were stunned to see what looked like farmland floating on mirrors. Bernal Diaz de Castillo, one of Cortez's men, described it as like something from a dream. You can almost imagine him clutching his sword tighter, unsure whether he was seeing witchcraft or engineering. The water laps gently against the boat. The guide gestures toward a tangle of roots ahead. He says, "That one's still alive." You squint. It looks like a small island of reeds, but as you get closer, you see corn stalks poking through, flowers growing along its edge, and willow trees standing tall like sentinels. "It's been growing since my grandfather's time," he said. "The land breathes if you listen close." You tilt your head. The air hums faintly, a mixture of insect wings and the whisper of water against roots. Maybe that's what he means. Or maybe the Chinampa really is alive. Either way, you're not arguing. A dragonfly lands on your hand, shimmering blue. You resist the urge to move. Its wings flicker like tiny blades. "They say the dragonflies here are messengers," the guide murmurs. "They carry gossip between the spirits and the living." "Hopefully they keep secrets too," you reply. He laughs, the sound blending with the night.
Third joke achieved, and you didn't even mean it to land. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. The Aztecs believed each lake had a guardian spirit. Chichimacos was said to take the form of a serpent or woman who would lure travelers into the depths. Fishermen used to leave offerings, flowers, feathers, even small clay dolls to keep her appeased. Some still do, quietly, just in case. As the boat glides along, you notice small figures set among the reeds, tiny idols made of mud and straw, offerings. Even in the modern day, people still leave them here, though the tourists think they're just folk art. You wonder if any part of the old gods still lingers, waiting for prayers spoken in Nahuatl to break through the static of car engines and mariachi radios. You pass under an arch made of vines, and suddenly the air smells sweet, jasmine or something close. The moon peeks through, catching ripples on the water. For a moment, everything feels suspended, timeless. You could be drifting through centuries. The guide points toward the horizon. Beyond there, he says, the first city rose. You look. Faint lights shimmer in the distance, reflections of skyscrapers, perhaps. But for a heartbeat, you imagine pyramids. Tenochtitlan, city of canals and stone temples, where priests in feathered cloaks once blessed these same waters. Everything starts beneath the waterline, the guide says softly. That's where the echoes sleep. You let his words sink in, feeling the boat sway with the rhythm of time. Beneath you lies a buried world. Roots of reed and history, ghosts of farmers and gods alike. The air hums with memory. And as you drift toward the next bend, you realize something strange. The water isn't just reflecting the stars tonight. It's reflecting you. Your face blending with the ancient night, another echo among echoes.
The water grows shallower as dawn begins to tease the horizon. A pale pink light spreads across the sky, and the mist lifts just enough to reveal the vast green sprawl of the Chinampas. You can finally see their full pattern, a mosaic of rectangles, stitched together by narrow canals that glitter like veins of mercury. You feel small in the middle of it, like you've wandered into a living circuit board built from mud and dreams. Your guide rests his paddle against the boat's edge and squints toward the east. This, he says, was the Empire's green machine. He spreads his arms as if presenting an invisible audience to an invisible world. Everything you see once fed Tenochtitlan: maize, beans, squash, flowers, and gossip. Lots of gossip, he smirks. You can almost picture it. The 15th century bustle of this floating paradise, farmers in reed canoes ferrying produce to the city's markets, priests blessing seedlings before sunrise, women weaving garlands of marigolds for the temples, children racing frogs down the canal banks shrieking with laughter. The world here wasn't quiet like it is now. It pulsed with life. In your mind, the scene unfolds. You're suddenly there, in the middle of it all, drifting between rows of vibrant green. The smell of wet soil and crushed leaves fills your lungs. Every surface is alive. The Aztecs grew maize taller than a man, beans curling up the stalks, and pumpkins spreading wide at their base. This Three Sisters method wasn't unique to them, but they perfected it, making every inch count. Historians still argue whether the Chinampas were government-owned or managed by local families. Some say the emperor assigned them to noble houses, others claim they were communal lands shared by neighborhoods. You lean toward the latter. It feels more human, more fitting to imagine neighbors trading maize and gossip across the canals than bureaucrats measuring mud plots with stone rulers. See that? Your guide says, pointing toward a small, overgrown island. That's how they used to rotate crops. Every few years, they'd flood a chinampa to let the lake recharge the soil. Smart people. Lazy sometimes, but smart. You raise your eyebrow, and he grins. Don't look shocked. Even farmers take naps. He's right, though. The genius of the Chinampa system was its sustainability. Every bit of waste, fish bones, algae, old reeds, was reused.
The Aztecs dredged nutrient-rich mud from the canals and layered it back onto the gardens. Nothing went to waste. Modern scientists still study this system, trying to understand how a civilization with no machines built one of the most efficient agricultural networks in history. You trail your fingers through the water again. It's warmer now, filled with sunlight and tiny specks of life. Dragonflies dart between the reeds, and somewhere nearby a heron dips its beak, pulling up breakfast. You can't help but think, this isn't just farming, this is art. The Chinampas weren't just practical, they were beautiful. One historical fact for you. At its height, Tenochtitlan supported a population of over 200,000 people, roughly the size of London at the same time. And while Europe struggled with famines, the Aztecs thrived, largely thanks to these floating gardens. When Hernán Cortés and his men marched into the city in 1519, they found markets overflowing with food, flowers, and even chocolate. The Spaniards couldn't decide whether they'd found heaven or witchcraft. Your guide laughs softly. They thought it was sorcery, he says. They saw crops growing on water and said this must be the devil's work. He shakes his head. Imagine thinking vegetables are demonic. You laugh too. It's either that or admit humans haven't changed that much. You pass a chinampa filled with flowers, bright red, orange, yellow. The scent is intoxicating. The Aztecs didn't just grow food here, they cultivated beauty. Flowers were sacred offerings, used in festivals and rituals. The city's markets overflowed with them, so many that the conquistadors wrote about entire boats carrying nothing but blossoms. You imagine a canal lined with floating rainbows. A quirky tidbit slips into the conversation. The Aztecs had a festival called Xochitl, the Feast of Flowers. It was essentially their version of a garden party, except with more incense, dancing, and minor human sacrifice. The highlight? Competitive flower arranging. Yes, really. You imagine two gardeners squaring off like samurai with bouquets instead of swords. Your guide dips his paddle again, steering toward the center of the canal. They say the emperor used to visit the gardens, he says. He'd float through with his nobles, inspecting crops, giving blessings, maybe stealing a tomato or two. You picture Emperor Moctezuma II lounging in a flower-covered canoe, being fanned by attendants as he critiques maize density. Power move, really. The sun rises higher now. Turning the water gold, you see reflections of trees, sky, and yourself, all rippling together. The world feels suspended between now and then. You realize that this place isn't lost, it's layered. The Aztec gardens are still here, breathing quietly beneath centuries of silt and asphalt. Historians still argue whether the Chinampas could have sustained Tenochtitlan forever or if ecological collapse was already creeping in before the Spanish arrived. Some evidence suggests overfarming and salinity from the lakes were beginning to stress the system. You picture exhausted farmers staring at wilted maize, whispering prayers to Tlaloc for mercy. Empires fall for many reasons, but hunger is usually one of them. The guide seems to sense your thoughts. Balance, he says simply. That's what they forgot. You take too much, even the gods stop feeding you. The boat rocks gently as you drift between two massive ahuehuete trees. Their roots twist deep into the water, anchoring the island like the bones of giants. Birds flit between their branches. You can hear the hum of bees, the buzz of unseen life. You lean back and let the rhythm carry you. The sound of the paddle, the rustle of reeds, it's almost hypnotic. For a moment, you imagine being one of those ancient gardeners, waking at dawn, hands stained with mud, heart filled with the simple faith that life grows as long as you tend it. Then your guide's voice cuts through the quiet. Of course, not everything they grew was for eating. He gestures to another patch of green. They had medicinal herbs too, things that could heal or, well, make you dream very strange dreams. You grin. You mean hallucinate? He shrugs. Depends who's asking. Priest said it let him speak to the gods. Farmer said it made the workday shorter. Second laugh of the section. Smooth delivery. As you drift past the herb patch, the scent grows sharp. Mint, sage, and something earthy you can't name. The Aztecs were botanists as much as farmers. They cataloged hundreds of plants, using them for medicine, rituals, and yes, the occasional divine conversation.
The emperor even had a botanical garden filled with specimens from across the empire, a pre-Columbian Kew Gardens, if you will. The light changes again, sharper, brighter. You squint toward the horizon. The modern city looms faintly beyond the trees, its skyline shimmering through heat and haze. The contrast is jarring. Concrete towers against ancient mud islands. But maybe that's the point. The empire's green machine hasn't vanished, it's just quieter now, humming beneath the surface. Your guide dips his paddle once more, the sound soft and steady. The city may have forgotten the gardens, he says, but the water never did. You watch the ripples fade, carrying that thought with you as the boat drifts onward, deeper into the maze where time refuses to move in straight lines. You lose count of how many bends you've drifted through. The canals twist and weave like a dream that refuses to stay still. By now, the mist has burned away, replaced by morning light that shimmers across the water in molten gold. Somewhere behind you, a rooster crows. Ahead, faint laughter ripples through the air, the kind that tells you you're approaching life. And sure enough, you are. The Chinampas come alive with people, voices, color, movement. You spot a small boat gliding past, its bow overflowing with flowers, the air fragrant with marigolds and lilies. The woman rowing hums softly, her hair wrapped in a bright cloth. "Buenos dias," she calls, waving cheerfully as she passes. You wave back, though your voice feels too small to answer. Your guide grins. "Locals," he says. "They still bring flowers from here to the markets. Some things never change." It's easy to imagine this scene 500 years ago, only the clothes different, the boats carved a little rougher, the water cleaner, maybe. You see farmers standing knee-deep in mud, their arms strong from years of planting maize and beans. Children paddle with baskets of fish wriggling at their feet. Dogs bark from the banks. Priests wander between gardens, scattering flower petals and murmuring blessings. This is where the empire's heart beats, between the oars, between the songs. The floating gardens weren't just farms, they were neighborhoods, workplaces, sanctuaries. The people who lived here were the quiet engine of Aztec civilization, feeding a metropolis that glittered in the middle of a lake. Historians still argue whether life on the Chinampas was idyllic or grueling. Some accounts describe abundance, crops so plentiful that no one went hungry. Others speak of back-breaking labor, endless mud, and strict tribute demands from Tenochtitlan's rulers. The truth, as usual, probably lived somewhere in the middle, half paradise, half exhaustion. You glide past a group of men repairing a wooden fence, laughter echoing over the water. They wave lazily before returning to work. The farmers, your guide says, they were the philosophers of dirt. Every patch of soil, every reed meant something. You smirk. And the priests? He chuckles. They were the ones pretending they invented mud. First joke, dry like the soil wasn't. You're starting to like this man. As the morning brightens, the sounds of daily life bloom around you. Someone beats a drum in the distance, a steady rhythm that might be music, or maybe a prayer. A woman calls out prices from her canoe, selling bunches of herbs and bundles of maize. Children splash in the water, daring each other to chase frogs. Dogs bark from the banks. Priests wander between gardens, scattering flower petals and murmuring blessings. Historians still argue whether life on the Chinampas was idyllic or grueling. Some accounts describe abundance, crops so plentiful that no one went hungry. Others speak of back-breaking labor, endless mud, and strict tribute demands from Tenochtitlan's rulers. The truth, as usual, probably lived somewhere in the middle, half paradise, half exhaustion. You glide past a group of men repairing a wooden fence, laughter echoing over the water. They wave lazily before returning to work. The farmers, your guide says, they were the philosophers of dirt. Every patch of soil, every reed meant something. You smirk. And the priests? He chuckles.
They were the ones pretending they invented mud. First joke, dry like the soil wasn't, you're starting to like this man. As the morning brightens, the sounds of daily life bloom around you. Someone beats a drum in the distance, a steady rhythm that might be music or maybe a prayer. A woman calls out prices from her canoe, selling bunches of herbs and bundles of maize. Children splash in the water, daring each other to chase frogs. Dogs bark from the banks. Priests wander between gardens, scattering flower petals and murmuring blessings. Historians still argue whether life on the Chinampas was idyllic or grueling. Some accounts describe abundance, crops so plentiful that no one went hungry. Others speak of back-breaking labor, endless mud, and strict tribute demands from Tenochtitlan's rulers. The truth, as usual, probably lived somewhere in the middle. Half paradise, half exhaustion. You glide past a group of men repairing a wooden fence, laughter echoing over the water. They wave lazily before returning to work. The farmers, your guide says, they were the philosophers of dirt. Every patch of soil, every reed meant something. You smirk. And the priests? He chuckles. They were the ones pretending they invented mud. First joke, dry like the soil wasn't, you're starting to like this man. As the morning brightens, the sounds of daily life bloom around you. Someone beats a drum in the distance, a steady rhythm that might be music or maybe a prayer. A woman calls out prices from her canoe, selling bunches of herbs and bundles of maize. Children splash in the water, daring each other to chase frogs. Dogs bark from the banks. Priests wander between gardens, scattering flower petals and murmuring blessings. The Aztecs had dozens of agricultural festivals, each one tied to a season or crop. There was Huitzotzil, the Great Vigil, when the first maize was blessed. There was Etzalcoatzli, the time for feasts and offerings to Tlaloc, the rain god. And of course, Panquetzalitzli, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the sun god, usually with dancing, flowers, and, well, the occasional human heart. You feel a chill crawl down your spine. Your guide notices. Relax, he says, smirking. They only sacrificed the volunteers. You raise an eyebrow. Volunteers? He nods, solemn for half a beat, then bursts out laughing. That's what the priests said anyway. Third joke, dark humor achievement unlocked. A mainstream fact, the Aztecs organized their society around calpulli, clans or districts where families worked and lived collectively. Each calpulli managed its own chinampas, ensuring everyone contributed and everyone ate. It was community agriculture before it became a buzzword. The city government kept track, but the spirit of the system was shared labor. As the sun climbs higher, the canals shimmer with light. You passed a group of young men singing as they ferry baskets of maize toward the main channel. One strums a simple stringed instrument, something like a lute, something older. The rhythm is hypnotic, repetitive, like a heartbeat echoing through centuries. Music for the gods, your guide says. Or maybe just for the workday. You smile and imagine Aztec farmers humming the same tune 500 years ago. Music was woven into everything here, planting, harvesting, even irrigation. Scholars believe the Aztecs used drums and conch shells to coordinate work across the Chinampas. Imagine an orchestra of mud, water, and humanity, keeping time with the earth itself. You drift closer to an island where a small crowd is gathered. They're watching something, an old man balancing a clay pot on his head while telling a story. His voice rises and falls like waves, his gestures exaggerated. You catch fragments, gods, floods, the first maize plant growing from a god's sacrificed body. The people laugh and clap, tossing flowers into the water when he finishes. Storytellers, your guide says, still paid in applause and produce. You linger, listening as another performer begins. The tale twists around your imagination, a myth of the lake's birth, of a goddess crying so long that her tears became these canals. You wonder if she still weeps. The fringe tidbit of this stretch. The Aztecs used crocodile dung as sunscreen. Yes, really. It was mixed with minerals and herbs to protect the skin from the sun. Talk about commitment, you mutter, wiping sweat from your forehead. I'll stick to SPF 50. Your guide laughs so hard the boat rocks dangerously. Don't mock it, he warns between chuckles. They also used it for medicine and to scare children. You make a mental note. Ancient parenting, efficient and disgusting. The air grows warmer. You take a deep breath and smell the mingling scents of earth, flowers, and the faint salt of the lake. It feels alive in a way city air never does. Every island, the guide says quietly, had its own story, its own soul. Some were for maize, some for flowers, some just for rest. The people understood that land isn't just dirt, it's memory. You nod, and the silence that follows feels sacred. You look at the water and imagine all the lives reflected there. The laughter, the prayers, the endless rhythm of planting and harvest. The Chinampas weren't just floating gardens, they were floating worlds. A breeze ripples across the canal, and the marigolds sway as if bowing. Somewhere in the distance, a conch shell blows, a low, mournful note that trembles through the morning. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over you. It's impossible to tell whether it's the past calling or the present pretending to remember. You open them again just as the
canal narrows until you can reach out and brush the reeds on both sides. The light softens again, filtered through the thick canopy of willows that guard this hidden corridor. The air smells rich, heavy with mud and moss, the scent of things breaking down and being reborn. It's quieter here, too, as if the world has stepped back to let the water speak. Here, your guide says, is where the science lived. You drift to the edge of a chinampa, one that still breathes. The soil looks black and dense, almost velvety. A row of maize rises in neat formation, their leaves whispering with the wind. Tiny flowers bloom between the stalks, red and yellow like spilled confetti. You kneel, dip your hand into the mud and feel the cool pulse of the earth. It's strange to think of the Aztecs as scientists, but they were. Practical scientists, the kind who worked with mud instead of metal. They didn't have microscopes, but they understood ecosystems. They knew that if you layer reeds, lake muck, and decayed plants just right, the soil becomes a living thing, a sponge that feeds itself. The process was elegant. First, they built a frame from reeds and branches. Then they piled in vegetation dredged from the lake, mixed it with silt, and let nature do the rest. Every few years, they'd pull up new sediment from the canal bottoms to refresh the plots. The nutrients from algae, fish, and decomposed matter kept the Chinampas perpetually fertile. It was organic farming before organic became a marketing gimmick. Historians still argue whether this system was discovered by accident, maybe a pile of floating debris that sprouted a few plants, or through deliberate experimentation. Either way, it worked so perfectly that it sustained millions. The Aztecs had found the perfect loop. Waste became food, and food fed the people who made the waste. Your guide grabs a handful of the dark soil and holds it up. "Best dirt on earth," he says proudly. "My grandfather used to say, you could plant a stone here and it would grow roots out of guilt." You laugh, brushing a streak of mud off your hand. "Maybe I should try that with my houseplants." He grins. "Start with something less stubborn than a stone. Maybe a cactus. They forgive neglect." First joke, successfully earthy. You peer closer at the plants. Some of them are clearly ancient varieties. Maize shorter than the modern kind, beans with mottled patterns, flowers that look like stars. These are heirlooms, your guide says, passed down seed to seed. Some of these strains are older than Spain. You can't help but feel awe. Every plant here is a time capsule, a living memory of a civilization that refused to die. And here's your historical fact. The Aztecs cultivated more than 150 types of edible plants, including maize, beans, amaranth, chia, squash, and tomatoes. They even grew spirulina algae from the lake's surface, pressing it into blue-green cakes for protein. Spanish chroniclers described it with a mix of admiration and disgust. One wrote, "The people eat the scum of the water." Joke's on him, though. Modern scientists call it a superfood. Your guide wades into the shallow water, lifting a handful of algae that glows faintly green in the sunlight. This, he says, is what kept them strong. It's like eating sunlight. He grins. Also tastes terrible. You tilt your head. You've tried it? Once, he admits. Never again. I'd rather chew a cactus. Second joke, earned through shared trauma. You follow him as he moves along the Chinampa, inspecting the crops. His hands are sure and gentle, like someone greeting old friends. They used to fertilize with everything, he explains. Ash, compost, fish bones, even human waste, carefully treated. Nothing wasted. You raise an eyebrow. Everything? He nods solemnly. Everything. The Aztecs were the original zero wasters. They even had public toilets that collected waste for fertilizer. The Spanish destroyed most of them because they thought it was witchcraft. You shake your head. Witchcraft? For recycling? He smirks. You know how humans are. If it works too well, it must be evil. Third joke, social commentary edition. You crouch again, watching as he digs a small trench to show you the soil layers. It's mesmerizing. The way the black muck glistens like oil, the way roots snake through it effortlessly. This wasn't primitive farming. This was precision engineering with a side of divine reverence. The Aztecs believed Tlaloc, the rain god, and his consort Chalchihuitle, goddess of lakes, lived beneath these waters. Every harvest was both a transaction and a prayer. Farmers often left small offerings, flowers, coins, or even blood pressed into the mud before planting. The idea was simple. Feed the earth, and the earth feeds you. You notice a faint shimmer along the canal bank, a cluster of tiny silver fish darting through the reeds. The water is alive, buzzing with insects, rippling with motion. This ecosystem, you realize, was the foundation of the Aztec Empire. It wasn't gold or war or gods that made them powerful. It was mud. People forget, your guide says, straightening up. Empires don't grow from stone. They grow from soil. You nod, because it's true. A breeze stirs the trees, and sunlight flashes off the water. You sit back in the boat, letting the rhythm of the day lull you. The sound of birds echoes overhead. The Chinampa feels alive around you, like it's breathing in time with the world. Your guide continues. Every generation, we come back to the mud. Doesn't matter what the world builds above it, cities, empires, highways, the earth always calls us back. The canal widens again. The light sharpens, bouncing off the ripples. The city's noise creeps faintly into the distance, but here, it's still the Aztecs' world, a green machine still humming after centuries of silence. You lean back, hands stained with black soil, and let the boat drift. The water laps against the hull with a slow, steady heartbeat. You breathe in deep, and for a moment, you swear the air itself tastes fertile. Your guide dips his paddle again, steering you toward a bend where the canal widens and the trees grow thin. He glances at you, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. He says quietly, "You've seen how they made life. Now you'll see what tried to end it." A chill runs through you, even in the warmth of the day. Ahead, the water looks darker, heavier. You don't know yet if it's shadow or history, but either way, you're going there. The boat glides forward, its gentle wake spreading ripples that shimmer like scales. The air thickens, not just with humidity, but with something else. Tension, maybe. The kind that comes before a storm, or after a prophecy has been ignored for too long. Your guide doesn't speak for a while. The only sounds are the lap of water, the call of unseen birds, and the distant, haunting hum of wind through hollow reeds. You can almost sense the ghosts of centuries leaning closer, waiting for you to remember them. Then he says quietly, "It happened fast. Too fast for the earth to catch its breath." The first sight of invaders must have looked unreal. Great white sails cutting across the lake like mountains made of cloth. The Aztecs had seen traders and travelers before, but these men came wrapped in metal, carrying thunder that spat death. The year was 1519. Hernan Cortés and his men stepped into a world that had mastered floating gardens and decided they could own it. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs mistook Cortés for a returning god or simply underestimated him. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, the mix of diplomacy, curiosity, and fatal optimism that humans excel at. As the Spaniards advanced, they marveled at the sight of the Chinampas. One conquistador wrote that the city of Tenochtitlan looked as if it rose from the water like a vision. Canals teemed with canoes, gardens floated like carpets of green, the air smelled of blossoms and smoke. It was the Venice of the New World, only larger, cleaner, and, ironically, more sustainable. And then came the fire. Cortés's men, in their hunger for gold and souls, began dismantling what they didn't understand. Gardens were trampled by horses, shrines were burned. Even the lakes themselves were seen as obstacles, inconveniently wet real estate in the way of progress. You can almost hear it, the clash of steel against obsidian blades, the screams echoing across the canals, smoke drifting over fields of maize, the gods of the lake weeping beneath the surface. Your guide taps his paddle against the water. He says, "They drained it." The Spanish didn't like the floods, so they started filling in the canals. Bit by bit, they killed the water. It's a strange tragedy, isn't it? The conquerors thought they were improving things, turning water into land, making it civilized. They didn't realize they were erasing one of humanity's greatest ecological masterpieces. He adds, they brought diseases too, smallpox, measles. The people had no defense. The floating gardens, full of life, turned into places of death. You close your eyes for a moment, and the world seems to blur. You imagine standing here in 1521, watching as canoes carried the sick, their skin blotched and burning, drifting between the dying maize. The empire that once sang to its gardens was silenced by invisible invaders. Your guide sighs. Still, the Chinampas didn't die easily. The people kept planting, even while hiding from soldiers. Some gardens became shelters. Others became graves. It's haunting, the idea that life and death grew from the same soil. He steers you toward a small island overgrown with reeds and wildflowers. The roots knit together so tightly that the ground feels firm beneath your feet when you step out. You crouch, touching the dirt again. It's darker now, heavier, history pressed into every grain. The Spanish had tried to replace the Chinampas with European farming methods, dry fields, fenced plots, but nothing worked as well. The Aztec system was too efficient, too perfectly tuned to this land. The invaders could destroy temples, burn codices, outlaw rituals, but they couldn't unteach the soil. There's a bit of irony here. The same empire that worshipped gold ignored the real treasure under its feet. If the Spaniards had valued mud as much as metal, maybe this story would have ended differently. You find a broken pottery shard half buried in the earth. It's painted with faded turquoise patterns, maybe part of a bowl once used for offerings. You lift it carefully, brushing the dirt away. For a moment, it feels warm, as if the past itself hasn't quite cooled. The guide smiles faintly. He says, "They say when the first temples burned, the smoke rose over the lake like mourning veils. Even the herons flew away." He pauses, eyes distant. But the people, some of them, they stayed. They hid in the marshes, among the reeds. My ancestors, maybe yours too. They pretended to obey, but at night they still whispered prayers to Tlaloc, still planted their maize in secret. There's your quirky tidbit. During early colonial rule, some Chinampas disguised traditional offerings as Christian rituals. They'd place candles near the water under the guise of honoring saints, but beneath the wax floated small tokens for the old gods, corn husks, feathers, and bits of obsidian. Old faith wearing a new mask. You chuckle softly. So, basically ancient resistance cosplay? The guide grins. Exactly. You pray to the Virgin by day, Tlaloc by night. Insurance policy. That earns your first joke. Practical Spirituality Edition. As you walk, you notice the contrast everywhere. Spanish-style stone ruins lean beside the wild green of native growth. Nature is slowly reclaiming the conquest. The willows stretch higher. The reeds whisper louder. The water, patient as always, flows back into the spaces men tried to fill. It strikes you how cyclical it all is. Empires rise, drain lakes, write laws, and then one rainy season later, the water just laughs and returns. The guide picks up a handful of mud, lets it drip through his fingers. My grandmother used to say the lake forgives, but it never forgets. You glance at the horizon. Storm clouds are gathering, bruised purple and gray. A low rumble rolls across the sky. Fitting. The rain's coming. Good. The lake needs it. You both hurry back to the boat. As the first drops fall, you feel the shift in the air, the electric smell of ozone, the soft patter on the leaves. Rain glazes the surface of the canal, turning it to liquid glass. You tilt your face up, letting the cool drops run down your cheeks. The storm builds quickly. Wind pushes waves against the Chinampas. Thunder growls in the distance. Somewhere, you imagine Tlaloc laughing, finally getting a word in after centuries of silence. You shout over the noise. Do you think the gods ever left? The guide shakes his head, his hair plastered to his face. No, he says simply. They just learnt patience. There's your second joke, Divine Endurance Edition. The rain intensifies, drumming on the wooden hull. Lightning flashes, illuminating the water in stark white. For a heartbeat, you swear you see shapes beneath the surface, figures moving, hands planting seeds that glow like embers before fading into darkness. Then it's gone, just ripples. The storm passes as fast as it came. The clouds drift apart, revealing a blood-orange sunset bleeding across the horizon. The air smells clean again, rinsed of sorrow. Your guide exhales slowly. Every time it rains, the Chinampas remember. That's why we still plant. It's our way of saying, we remember too. You nod, watching the last drops slide off the boat's edge. The world feels strangely balanced again, even after centuries of chaos. He says, come, there's something else I want to show you, something that refused to die. You push off the island, the boat glides forward once more, cutting through reflections of clouds and fire. Behind you, the storm murmurs like a closing chapter. Ahead, the water glows, faintly under the returning sun. You're heading towards survival now, towards stubborn life clinging to the ruins. And maybe, just maybe, towards redemption. The air is thick with that post-storm perfume, ozone, damp reeds, and something almost sweet, like freshly split wood. You trail your fingers along the canal's surface, tracing the last trembling rings of rain. The sky has turned a gentle gold, and the willows droop as if weary from applause. The city's hum returns faintly, but here it's more memory than noise. You drift past fields of maize, beans, and flowers that seem to have reappeared out of nowhere. Life, it seems, doesn't know how to quit. The gardens that wouldn't die, your guide murmurs, echoing the thought that just crossed your mind. Even after conquest, plague, and drought, people still came back. He gestured toward the small plots dotting the water. Families tend them now. Men, women, and children, their laughter carrying over the ripples. You watch as a young boy in rubber boots tosses handfuls of compost into the soil, while his grandmother kneels beside him, humming a tune older than any written record. These are chinampas, your guide explains, descendants of the first builders. They've been here for 500 years, through everything. You blink. They never left? Never, he says. They adapted. They always adapt. It's strange. You've spent so much time thinking of the Aztec Empire as something lost. But here it is, breathing under a modern sun, not as temples or armies, but as habits, gestures, and the quiet rhythm of work. You glide closer to one of the islands where an elderly man waves you in. He wears a straw hat and an expression carved from sunlight and patience. You're late, he says to your guide with mock annoyance. Rain slowed us, but the lake forgave us, so all is well. The old man chuckles, as long as you brought stories. You exchange greetings, and soon you're helping him with his task, spreading new sediment onto the chinampa. The mud is heavy, warm, and alive with the smell of growth. The old man works in silence, except for a low whistle that drifts in and out of tune. This is how it always was, your guide whispers beside you. Even after the Spanish outlawed traditional practices, people worked the same way. At night, in secret, the lake taught them to be quiet. You dig deeper into the mud and find roots that look ancient, gnarled like veins of time. They've been holding this island together for generations. You feel a strange awe. Your guide continues. The Spanish tried to turn the lake into farmland. Then Mexico City built over the dry parts. But the chinampas, they float. You can't pave over water. There's your historical fact. By the late 1600s, most of Lake Texcoco was drained to make room for colonial expansion. But the southern reaches, Xochimilco and Taliuca, remained wetland. The chinampas survived there, quietly feeding the growing city. The old man interrupts your thoughts with a grin. Did you know we still grow flowers for the Day of the Dead here? The marigolds, capuchin, they all come from these canals. You nod, watching him gesture to rows of bright orange blooms that seem to glow from within. The air hums faintly with bees. They say the flowers guide the spirits home, but maybe they just remind the living where they came from. That one hits deeper than you expect. He wipes his hands on his trousers and continues. We're stubborn people, he says proudly. The city forgets us, but we don't forget the water. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some modern chinampas use axolotls, those smiling, frilly amphibians native to the region, to naturally control pests and fertilize crops. Locals call them little gardeners. Scientists call them nearly extinct. Yet here, in secret channels, they survive. Your guide gestures toward the water's edge. Look closely. You lean over, and sure enough, a small axolotl wiggles just beneath the surface, its pink gills fluttering like tiny fans. It looks impossibly delicate and somehow eternal. They were sacred once, he says softly. The god axolotl turned himself into one to escape death, but death found him anyway. You smile faintly. Sounds familiar? He nods. We all turn into something to survive. That earns your third joke, Existential Metamorphosis Edition. The sky deepens into purple. Lights flicker on along the banks. Tiny lanterns, some electric, others candlelit. A radio hums from a distant boat, playing a slow ranchera song that mingles with the chorus of crickets. Your guide and the old man talk quietly about crop rotations and rainfall, words that sound more like prayers than planning. You drift, half listening, half dreaming. Historians still argue whether the modern chinampas are direct continuations of pre-Columbian ones or later reconstructions built on the ruins. But standing, or rather floating here, that question feels almost irrelevant. Continuity doesn't need perfection. It just needs persistence. You take one last look around before stepping back into the boat. The old man waves you off with muddy hands. Tell the world we're still here, but not too many people. We like our peace. The boat pushes off, gliding into the dusk. The lanterns reflect in the canal, a constellation upside down. For a moment, you can't tell where the sky ends and the water begins. Your guide breaks the silence. The city tries to forget, but every time it rains, the lake rises a little higher. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe, but the ghosts might have opinions. You raise an eyebrow. Ghosts? He smiles faintly. You'll see. The night wraps around you like silk. The hum of insects deepens, and a low mist begins to gather over the canal. The temperature drops just enough to raise goosebumps on your skin. The boat keeps moving, quiet as thought. You can smell wood smoke and hear the faint plink of water against the hull. Somewhere behind you, a dog barks once, then nothing. The mist thickens, shadows lengthen. The lantern's glow shrinks until it's barely a coin of light in the fog. Your guide leans forward and whispers, "This is where the living end and the remembering begins." You feel the hairs on your arms lift. Ahead the water seems darker, almost reflective to the point of depthless. You peer into it and think you see movement. A hand? A face? Just ripples? Hard to tell. The gardens may have survived, but so did their echoes. And as you drift deeper into the mist, you realize that survival and haunting might just be the same thing.
The mist folds around you like breath on glass, dense, pearly, and unsettlingly alive. The soundscape narrows, the faint creak of wood, the steady dip of the paddle, and the far-off croak of a frog who clearly didn't get the memo about dramatic timing. You sit back, pulling your jacket tighter as the cool dampness seeps through. "Don't be afraid," your guide murmurs. "They're only watching." "Who?" you whisper back. Because that's what one does in fog this thick. You whisper, because talking at full volume feels like it might summon something. He just smiles. The gardeners, the ones who never left. The boat glides silently through the vapor. It's impossible to tell how wide the canal is now. The mist blurs edges until everything feels infinite. Water, air, and sky all melt together into one long exhale. Then you hear it, a faint rustling in the reeds. Not quite footsteps, not quite wind, something in between. "Do people still come out here at night?" you ask. He shakes his head. "Not the living ones." The answer lands like a pebble in your stomach, but he's smiling, so you can't tell if he's joking. You hope he's joking. The Aztecs believed that the souls of the dead didn't just vanish, they transformed. Warriors who died in battle became hummingbirds. Women who died in childbirth became spirits of the wind. And the farmers, the caretakers of Thalok's gifts, some said they became guardians of the Chinampas, spirits who wandered the waterways, ensuring the soil stayed fed, the crops stayed growing, and that no one disrespected the mud. Historians still argue whether these beliefs persisted into the colonial era or were swallowed by Christian syncretism. But standing here, surrounded by mist that smells faintly of lilies and wet earth, you're not sure the debate matters. Some things feel too tangible to be just myths. The guide dips his paddle again, and for a moment the water glows faintly green beneath the surface. Maybe it's bioluminescent algae. Maybe it's something older. You lean over the edge. Your reflection wavers, then distorts, another face rippling through it. One that isn't yours. A woman's maybe,
with eyes like polished obsidian. When you blink, she's gone. "Did you see that?" you murmur. The guide shrugs. Sometimes they like to look back. First joke, paranormal small talk edition. The fog parts slightly, revealing the faint outline of another chinampa ahead. Lanterns line its edge, their flames steady despite the damp. You can just make out figures kneeling near the center, moving rhythmically as if tending plants. The boat drifts closer, and you realize the figures are translucent, shimmering outlines of people repeating a motion that no longer has purpose. "Every night," your guide says softly, "they plant. They don't know the empire fell. They don't care." You watch, transfixed. The spectral farmers stoop, dig, press something invisible into the earth, then straighten in perfect unison. Their movements are too calm to be frightening, more like a memory looping endlessly. One turns her head toward you. Her face is indistinct, but her eyes seem kind. She raises a hand, palm open, and then returns to her work. They're not trapped, they just continue. The phrase feels heavy, like it carries an entire worldview. Maybe that's what all survival really is, continuing even when the reason is long gone. A low sound rises from the canal, soft singing, almost a lullaby. The words are ancient Nahuatl, lilting and slow, blending vowels like flowing water. You don't understand the language, but you understand the tone, care, ritual, repetition. The guide joins in quietly, his voice rough but sure. It feels like the air itself leans closer to listen. When the song fades, you sit for a while in silence. Then he says, "They say sometimes the dead visit to remind the living how to care for the land. If you stop planting, the lake stops forgiving." You exhale. "So the hauntings just quality control?" He grins. "Exactly. Ghost farmers, nature's auditors." Second joke, ethereal management edition. The fog begins to thin. You see shapes again. Small bridges, clusters of trees, the faint outline of houses on distant banks. But the atmosphere doesn't lighten. It shifts from sacred to nostalgic, as if the past is quietly slipping back into its hiding place. The guide points toward a half-sunken statue ahead. A weathered stone figure of Tlaloc, his mouth cracked but still smiling. Moss covers his shoulders like a shawl. Someone has placed fresh flowers in his hands. "That wasn't here last week," he notes. "Someone's still making offerings." You nod. Some habits die harder than empires. He chuckles. "Especially the good ones." Third joke, habitual holiness edition. You circle the statue, the boat brushing gently against its base. Water lilies bloom in the shallows, their petals pale against the dark water. For a heartbeat, the scene feels frozen in time. Tlalocs surrounded by offerings, fog curling like incense, and ghosts bending to plant unseen seeds. It's then that you realize something. These gardens aren't haunted because they're old. They're haunted because they're remembered. Your guide must sense your thought because he says quietly, "The dead don't linger out of fear. They linger because someone still loves them." He gestures to the water. "That's why we keep planting. It's not just for food. It's for memory, for connection." You nod, throat tight. "That's beautiful." He smirks. "And cheaper than therapy." You laugh, breaking the spell just enough to breathe again. The boat drifts onward. The fog begins to lift fully now, revealing the faint lights of modern Xochimilcan beyond, the city's reflection flickering across the water. Neon signs shimmer where torches once burned. The contrast should feel jarring, but somehow it doesn't. The old and the new coexist, layered like sediment in the same lake. As you pass under a low bridge, graffiti sprawls across the stone. La tierra recuerda. The earth remembers. The phrase lingers in your mind. There's your quirky tidbit. Locals sometimes claim that during droughts, the canals cry. When the mud cracks, it emits a low, moaning sound as the trapped gases escape, something scientists call acoustic desiccation. But to the Chinampas, it's the voice of the lake mourning neglect. They'll pour water onto the ground to soothe it, whispering apologies as they do. The guide confirms it. We still do that sometimes, just in case. He dips his hand into the canal and lets the water run through his fingers. The lake listens. The city draws nearer. The fog behind you thins to a silver ribbon. Somewhere in its depths, faint lights flicker. Ghost lanterns, still working their eternal shift. You can't help but glance back one last time. And there she is, the woman from before, standing knee-deep in the water, holding a single marigold. She nods once, solemnly, then dissolves into mist. You whisper, "Thank you." Your guide doesn't respond. He's humming again, that same tune from before, something both ancient and comforting. The hum of the city grows louder, traffic, laughter, music spilling from unseen patios. Life, impatient as ever, presses forward. But even as you return to the edge of the living world, you realize the ghosts aren't gone. They're in the water, the soil, the air you breathe. They're in the hands of every farmer who plants a seed without knowing why it feels sacred. The guide ties the boat to a dock and says softly, "Now you have met them. You understand what we protect." You nod, stepping onto the wooden platform. The planks creak under your weight, like a heartbeat. You glance back once more, but the mist has swallowed everything. Only the ripple of water remains. He smiles, faintly lit by the dock's lantern. The ghosts will rest easy tonight. You listened. And somehow, that feels like both an ending and a beginning. You walk along the narrow dock, shoes tapping softly against the old wood. The air carries that same damp sweetness, water lilies, wet soil, and something faintly metallic, like the scent of old coins. The mist continues to unravel behind you, thin ribbons curling toward the horizon as if reluctant to let you go. Your guide, who still hasn't given you his name, by the way, motions for you to follow a narrow trail. It snakes between two chinampas, overgrown but solid beneath your feet. The moon slips through gaps in the clouds, spotlighting fragments of the ancient network. Crumbling walls of piled reeds, the dark skeleton of a wooden post jutting from the water, the faint whisper of frogs conducting a midnight orchestra. "You're lucky," he says. "Most visitors don't get to see this far inside." You glance at him. Is that because of danger or because of zoning laws? He laughs quietly. Both. First joke, Bureaucratic Horror Edition. He stops near a patch of soil that looks freshly turned. Someone's been working here recently. Rows of young plants, amaranth, maize, and some kind of squash glow pale under the moonlight. Their leaves glisten with dew. "You know," he says, squatting down to touch the soil, "this is how the Aztecs fed millions of people. The Chinampas produced 7 times more food than dry land farms." You crouch beside him. The soil feels spongy but rich, the texture of coffee grounds mixed with memory. "That's the mainstream historical fact," he adds with a half smile. "Figured you'd want to keep count." Touché. He goes on, explaining how the floating gardens weren't actually floating. They were engineered islands, anchored by willow trees, layered with mud and reeds to create a self-renewing ecosystem. Waste from the canals fertilized the crops, while the roots purified the water. A perfect loop of sustainability, centuries before the word existed. You run your hand through the earth.
It's alive. Literally. The soil vibrates faintly, teeming with microorganisms that don't care about your existential awe. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs developed the Chinampa system independently or inherited it from the earlier Xochimilca people. Either way, it was genius. You nod slowly. So, the empire was basically built on floating compost. Exactly. Civilization runs on muck. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Second joke, Dirty Truth Edition. He gestures for you to follow him again. You cross a narrow plank bridge, really more a suggestion of a bridge, over a canal. The water glows faintly, reflecting the moon like a secret mirror. Fireflies blink lazily above the surface. You pass by small shrines built from stones and clay figures, frogs, maize cobs, and one surprisingly detailed miniature canoe. Your guide pauses at a particularly elaborate altar. "This one's new," he murmurs. Offerings lie scattered around it. Marigold petals, a handful of maize kernels, and an iPhone flashlight left on, its beam flickering like a modern votive candle. You raise an eyebrow. "The gods take Venmo now?" He chuckles. "If it lights the way, it counts." Third joke, Divine Tech Support Edition. You stand there for a moment, staring at the strange blend of old and new. The iPhone casts its dying glow across the petals, making the colors pulse like embers. For a fleeting moment, you imagine the old gods squinting curiously at this glowing rectangle, trying to figure out how to play drums. Your guide grows quiet, eyes scanning the shadows. "We leave offerings like this when someone's gone missing," he says finally. "The canals still take people sometimes, tourists, fishermen, even dogs that get too close." Your breath catches. "That still happens?" "Not often, but enough." He doesn't elaborate, and you don't ask. Some silences are best respected. The wind stirs the reeds, and for a moment you swear you hear voices, not whispers exactly, but a soft, rhythmic chanting. When you turn, there's nothing but the water, rippling faintly under the moon. "Come on, there's something else you should see." You follow him toward the far end of the Chinampa, where the land dips into a shallow pool. Half-submerged logs form a rough spiral, their tops slick with moss. In the center of the spiral stands an old tree, its trunk hollow, its roots woven deep into the mud. "These," he says softly, "are one of the first ahuehuetes, the willows that anchored the islands. Some of these trees are over 600 years old." You step closer. The trunk is huge, wide enough that 5 people could barely wrap their arms around it. The air around it feels thicker, charged. You reach out and lay a hand on the bark. It's cool and damp, humming faintly beneath your palm. "They say these trees remember," he murmurs. "Every prayer, every name, every offering. The willows are the memory keepers." You tilt your head. "So, tree-based data storage, Aztec edition." He grins. "Exactly. Organic cloud computing." Fourth joke, prehistoric tech upgrade. You sit beneath the tree listening to the creak of its branches. The sound is deep, almost like a sigh. You think about all the people who've rested under it. Farmers, lovers, fugitives, maybe even priests hiding from conquistadors. The layers of time press close together here, like folds in wet paper. You close your eyes, and for a moment you can almost feel them, ghosts of the living and the dead, overlapping like transparent film. It's strange how peaceful it feels. Your guide sits beside you, silent for a while. Then he says, "You know, during the 20th century, people tried to drain these canals, said they were breeding grounds for mosquitoes. They almost succeeded." You open your eyes. "Almost?" He nods. The locals fought back. Farmers, activists, even school kids. They blocked machinery with their boats, planted trees faster than the bulldozers could clear them. It became a movement, and eventually the city gave up. A faint smile tugs at your mouth. So the Chinampas survived another conquest. He looks at you, bemused. In a way, yes. Every generation has to save them again. That's the curse of beauty. It's always at risk. Fifth joke, existential gardening edition. A heron glides low over the water, its wings cutting silently through the air. The moonlight catches its feathers, turning them silver. The moment feels cinematic, and you half expect dramatic music to start swelling. Instead, there's only the rustle of reeds and the quiet creak of the old willow. You glance at the guide. What happens if people stop caring? If the Chinampas finally disappear? He doesn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Then the ghosts will go hungry." The words hang there, half poetic, half warning. You want to ask what he means, but before you can, he stands and starts walking back toward the boat. You linger a moment longer beneath the willow, fingers tracing the grooves in the bark. The hum seems stronger now, like a heartbeat synced with your own. You whisper a quiet thank you, unsure if you're addressing the tree, the ghosts, or the earth itself. When you catch up to your guide, the mist is returning, sliding across the canals like a slow tide. He glances back once toward the willow. "They'll remember you now," he says. "The garden doesn't forget those who listen." The words send a shiver through you, not fear, but a strange.
The first thing you notice is the air. It's changing. The scent of wet soil fades into something sharper, cleaner, threaded with a faint trace of gasoline and the sweetness of street food cooking somewhere nearby. You realize the night is almost over. The mist still trails behind, stubborn and silver, but the world ahead is waking. The guide's paddle strokes slow, then stop. The boat drifts, coasting toward the faint orange halo that marks the edge of modern Xochimilcan. Lights reflect off the water, quivering like broken constellations. You feel the vibration of distant traffic through the wooden boards under your feet. "It always feels strange coming back," your guide says, "like you've walked through someone else's dream." You smile faintly. "I'm not convinced it wasn't mine." He gives a small shrug, the kind of shrug that says, "Maybe both." The boat glides under a bridge covered in murals, bright colors, defiant shapes. A jaguar god snarls from the concrete, surrounded by cornstalks and solar panels. It's not ancient art, but the energy feels just as sacred. Street artists have kept this place alive, your guide explains. They paint what's been forgotten, make it loud again. He gestures to a figure at the far edge of the mural, a woman made of water, her hair flowing into the canal, her eyes filled with stars. That's Chachuicle, the goddess of lakes and rivers. You tilt your head. She's beautiful. She's also temperamental, he says with a grin. Floods everything if she's not appreciated enough. First joke, Divine Emotional Support Edition. The city hum grows louder. You pass houseboats and modern chalupas docked along the banks, some strung with fairy lights, others painted in fluorescent colors that glow under the moon. Someone's playing a guitar on a nearby deck, singing softly, a love song that drifts through the air like a memory. You turn to the guide. Do people still live out here full-time? Some do. A few families still farm the old way. They call themselves Chinampa traditionalism. They plant amaranth, lettuce, herbs, even flowers. They sell to restaurants that care about heritage. He dips his hand into the water again. But it's hard. Pollution, drought, urban expansion. Every year there's less water. The boat rocks gently, the sound of the paddle echoing through the narrow canal. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system could save modern agriculture, or if it's just a romantic relic. You glance at the banks, half wild, half tamed, a delicate balance that seems to hold its breath. Maybe both can be true. He nods. Maybe that's the point. You pass another Chinampa, this one lined with candles, their flames trembling like nervous hearts. Paper marigolds float on the surface, glowing orange in the dim light. A small wooden cross stands at the center, wrapped in colorful ribbons. It's an ofrenda for Dia de Muertos. You look closer. There are photographs propped against the cross, faces smiling at some unseen joke, their edges curling from moisture. Next to them, a bottle of tequila and a bowl of tamales. You can almost hear laughter echoing faintly from somewhere deeper in the fog. They say the canals are busiest that night. The living and the dead ride together. You'd like it. You grin. I'd probably end up interviewing a ghost. Second joke, Paranormal Podcast Edition. The thought lingers, though. There's something beautiful about it. The idea that remembrance is an act of coexistence, not nostalgia. You realize that maybe the lost gardens were never really lost. They just shifted forms, half in the mud, half in the stories. The boat turns another corner, and suddenly the horizon opens wide. The lake spreads out, vast and gleaming under the early hint of dawn. The fog burns away in soft curls, revealing the skeletal remains of old reed walls stretching like veins across the water. Birds rise in flocks, startled into flight, their wings scattering droplets of gold as the first light hits. You inhale deeply. The world smells like beginnings again. This was once the heart of Tenochtitlan, the empire's center. Now it's just us and the herons. He points toward the far shore, where the faint outline of the city's skyline emerges, glass and steel shimmering in the sunrise. But look, see how the buildings reflect on the water? It's like the city grew out of the lake instead of over it. You squint. He's right. The skyscrapers shimmer like inverted mountains, their shapes quivering in the ripples. That's the irony, he continues. The Aztecs built on water because they believed it was sacred. We build on it now because we pretend it's not there. The irony hits you like a quiet truth. You look down at the water, at your own reflection merging with the sky, and wonder how many layers of memory you're floating on right now. Your guide breaks the silence with a half smile. You're thinking too hard again. Occupational hazard, you murmur. He chuckles. Don't worry, the lake forgives. Third joke, Existential Absolution Edition. The sun crests higher, washing everything in pale gold. The boat slows as you near the dock, a small wooden platform surrounded by reeds, half hidden in the growing light. You can see the road beyond it, cars already moving, a taco stand opening for the morning rush. Civilization, impatient as always. As the boat bumps gently against the dock, you hesitate. You don't want to leave,
not yet. There's a weight in your chest, a mix of awe and melancholy, like finishing a story you never wanted to end. The guide stands, offers you a hand. You made it, he says softly. Not everyone does. You raise your eyebrow. You mean emotionally? He smiles. Sure. Fourth joke, ambiguous survival edition. You step onto the dock, legs unsteady from hours on the boat. The wood creaks underfoot, welcoming you back to the world of solid ground. You turn to say something, to thank him, but the guide is already untying the boat. Wait, you call out. What's your name? He pauses, half smiling. It changes, he says. Depends on who asks. Okay, what should I call you then? He glances over his shoulder. Call me Quouchla. The eagle? You ask. He nods once. You remember your history. And with that, he pushes away from the dock. The boat drifts back into the morning mist, fading slowly until it's just another ripple on the water. You stand there for a while, listening. The city hums behind you, impatient and bright, but the lake hums too. Low, steady, eternal. Somewhere out there, ghosts still tend their gardens, humming ancient songs beneath the willow trees. You smile softly, whispering a quiet promise. The world remembers. And maybe, in this strange balance of decay and rebirth, that's enough.
The sounds of the city fade. The water stills. You let out a long, slow breath, watching the ripples stretch outward until they disappear. The night, or what's left of it, wraps itself around you like a soft blanket. The air still damp, still scented with earth and lilies. Your heartbeat begins to match the slow rhythm of the lake, and you realize how deeply you've sunk into its tempo. The pulse of the ancient canals, the rustle of willows, the quiet conversations of unseen spirits, all of it settles into you like sediment. You take another breath. The tension melts from your shoulders. Your mind softens at the edges. The lost gardens are no longer just a story. They're a living memory, breathing beneath the surface of a city that pretends to have moved on. The ghosts? They don't scare you anymore. They feel like caretakers, quiet stewards of something far older than fear. You imagine them tending their unseen crops, whispering lullabies to the soil, smiling faintly when someone new remembers their name. The air grows warmer now. The horizon blushes faintly pink, the color of slow forgiveness. You close your eyes, hearing only the hush of water against wood. Somewhere in the distance, a heron calls once, then falls silent. And that's your cue, to rest, to dream, to drift like the Chinampas themselves. The garden will still be here when you wake.